now in a second. Okay. So welcome everyone. Today we have Lena Neuekamp with us. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Well, she finished the PhD relatively recently in 2018. She studied in the University of Tartu in Estonia, and she's an specialist on, by the way, happy Women's Day to everyone, particularly those in science. Sadly scarce yet. So Lena is a specialist in plant-soil interaction, particularly in plant mycorrhizal interaction and the use of these interactions on ecosystem restoration. And an additional line of research for her, which is the one she will be presenting to us today, is urban ecology. So how urban ecosystems or urban anthroposystems can help us supply ecosystem services, and how different people from different socioeconomic perspectives is evaluating it, all right, or how is perceiving it. So she's co-leading one cost action where they are measuring ecosystem services in urban ecosystems or in cities, in 19 cities across Europe, and seeing how different managements can aid in the provision of these ecosystem services and how different people just value or perceive it. So Lena, without further delay, you can start wherever you want.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and happy Women's Day. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, right. Perfect. Yeah, I'm happy, Santi, that you invited me, because urban restoration is one very, I like the topic very much. And I think it's important to say, okay, urban restoration, great, but how do we do it actually? And as Santi said, I call it always, it's my hobby project, because actually I'm here with the European Fund to study drylands and soil microbes and plants. This is an orchid I found on the campus the other day. And how plants and soil microbes help to sustain ecosystem functioning in drylands. And there's not much about urban things in this. Yet, when I was a master student, I was in Estonia for an Erasmus, and I came back and came across a conference on urban ecosystems. And there was fancy things. It was in Berlin, and there was fancy things about vertical gardens and green roofs, and I found it very impressive, and I found it cool to go there just on my own because I liked it. And this interest kept, like, I took this interest with me to my PhD place in Tartu, and then throughout my postdoc up to here. And then there was a conference, I think 3 years into my PhD, where with friends, we just thought we would like to do a project together, and we were all interested in urban restoration, and this is where it started. So with urban restoration, it's the problem and the chance that humans use landscapes very intensively. They do mining, they put everywhere concrete, they use intensive agriculture, so they kind of poison the soil, or they just remove it because they need to increase cities. And all this is like the nature space outside cities is decreasing in its quality. And on the other hand, there are cities, and the cities are growing, and there are more and more people living, and there's loads of green spaces. And these green spaces are important for people. We know that it makes people more happy, it makes people more healthy, and more if we decrease the quality of nature around cities, then I think the importance of urban nature to replace the natural habitats or to complement them is very important. But urban nature, because they are humans, is special. On one hand, we have many valuable habitats. I'm more from the north of Europe, so what we have usually is like for example, very nice flower meadows you can have also within a city. But on the other hand, you can't, as an ecologist, just say, great, let's replace all these parks and make them natural habitats, because these parks are also there for humans to have picnics and do sunbathing and sports and go out with the dogs, and it's very important. So you need to find a compromise between doing something for nature and doing something for humans too. And then if I have been talking about urban restoration, what I thought of is that it's the ecological improvement of urban ecosystems in terms of their biodiversity, their functioning, or the services they provide. And this could be through a more natural management of existing ecosystems, of urban ecosystems. For example, in a park, not to mow the lawn 10 times a year, but maybe only once, or put aside a bit of a park for nature and let not people go everywhere. Maybe there's like trees and shrubs missing, and you introduce this species and plant them. Or you create new ecosystems like green roofs or the vertical gardens I was mentioning. And as for a good chocolate cake, you need the ingredients to make this urban restoration work. On one hand, you need to understand the ecological drivers and limitations. So what is good for urban biodiversity and functioning, and what is not good? And the same is true for what are the social drivers of urban biodiversity. Why do people prefer certain habitats or like urban green spaces, and why don't they like certain habitats? For example, in the city, maybe people are very afraid of ticks. So if you say them, oh, this is wild, they are afraid, and they say, I don't want to let my kids play there because they will have ticks and then they get sick. And or they say, but I want to do picnic, I want to do workout. How can I do it if there's trees everywhere? And the third point is, because if you work in urban areas, there's usually a framework. The urban areas belong to the city belongs to a county, the county belongs to a country, and all this urban restoration will cost money. So you need to define clear targets. What are you aiming for? Do you want to have a good looking flower meadow, or do you want, if you want to do restoration, do you want to try to come back to a more natural state of a park, for example? What is this natural state? So you will need to define a clear goal. What do you want to do? What do you want to end up with? And then you can make estimations. How much does it cost? What does it need? What should be the steps of progress? At which point maybe I see it doesn't work and I need to find an alternative way. So that's very important, to be able to communicate it. Because there will be people saying like, yeah, that's great that you want to make this more green, but how is this good for me as a person who is leading the city? And along these 3 points, I have ordered my my talk, and will tell of projects I have been involved in or I've heard of. First, for the ecological drivers, I've been lucky to be part, at least in the last year where the project was running, of a Biodiversity project. That's a European project putting together or enabling teams across Europe to work together. And in this case, it was 7 cities from Europe, in Lisbon, Almada, Zurich, Paris, Antwerp, Poznan, and also Tartu. And their idea was to understand what are the drivers of urban biodiversity across different taxa, bats and insects and birds and plants. And I was then also measuring soil biodiversity. And one important factor that did this for blue and green infrastructure, meaning for green spaces like lawns and parks and roadside verges, but also blue infrastructure, meaning water bodies. And they also were very interested in which role has the connectivity, because an ecosystem does only work if species can migrate from one patch to another. And in cities, sometimes this is not the case. The first results are coming out now, and I will show you three. The first result just published in Basic Applied and Ecology by Lucia about bats and nocturnal insects. And they were looking what kind of light conditions do bats actually need, because they're used to darkness, but then cities are quite light. And here you can see they looked at this in 3 cities, and you see clearly these 3 curves show light availability at night is really affecting the diversity, or the diversity of groups of bats. And in the big run, you can see that if light is very high, it usually decreases bat diversity, because not very many bats can handle light. Maybe they are irritated. I know too little about bats to explain that. And at the same time, it's interesting that low and medium values of light, for example, in Zurich, are actually okay. Maybe it's because it attracts more insects and then they have more food. And this was also, so bat diversity is affected by light. And then the researchers also looked at the role of isolation, so how well connected are the parks, and at the food of the bats, which are the nocturnal insects. And they found that isolation affected the nocturnal insect diversity, so it decreased the insects, and it decreased the bat activity. And then they found that if city conditions like light and isolation affect both nocturnal insects and the bats, and then nocturnal insects are the food of the bats, and the bats are the predator of the insects, the diversities of both of these groups are also related. And very likely the environmental conditions leading to light availability and isolation might be also correlated. Nicely showing that if we want to design the perfect landscape only for two groups, we need to consider many factors, and likely they're trade-offs. So likely you can't think of the best ecosystem for everything. So you might need to think, okay, if I want to have bats, I need to have this ecosystem, and then for insects, I might need that, and for birds, I might need the third one. So I think it's important to keep in mind that cities are not one urban ecosystem, but they are just a mosaic of different ecosystems, and we should keep track of how many there are, which kinds of they are, how much connected they are among each other. And then, what are insects eating? Insects need pollen. So another study recently in preparation by Johan from Zurich he looked at the pollen sources and simply finding out what are these insects eating. And now he looked at the food resources in the cities of 4 big insects, of the 4 most dominant insects. And what I just want you to see is that this first group is a bit a picky one. It eats only herbs, so species like plant species that grow on grasslands, and only the green stuff. And then the other 3 are very varied. They have pollen from trees and from shrubs and from herbs, indicating that a city, although you might think, ooh, flowering lawns are very good, at least in temperate zones, it's like the highlight. Everyone thinks if I have a flowering lawn, I'm like on the good side, all is good. But it tells you no, only lawn doesn't help, because there are insects which just need trees and shrubs. And sometimes a discussion is, okay, but then we have a lot of ornamental species, and are these ornamental species worse than the native species? And it might be that if you want to restore native vegetation, You don't want to have too many ornamental species, also because they might become invasive, so you can't control them anymore. But for the insects, the study showed that besides the picky species here, who wants only grass, native grass, or I don't really know, probably it's not grass, it's a flower they are liking the pollen from. All the other species, all the other insect species are happily fine with exotic and native species. So for the insects they are looking at, the ornamental proportion of plant species in cities is not such a big problem. And honestly, I guess there's no way we can ban ornamental species from cities. And maybe they're actually a good enrichment of the city biodiversity. Finally, it's like the study I was looking at. I was taking soil samples from all these cities and parks, and I'm currently analyzing them. The first results I can show you now are that both bacterial diversity and fungal diversity are negatively affected. Many bacterial and fungal species don't like it if the soil has too much phosphorus and too much iron. I have not really looked into it, but it might be places which are heavily disturbed, so that the pH is very low, and then you have a lot of iron, and maybe they're then depending on, maybe there's some stones underneath which makes a lot of phosphorus available. Yeah, these are the first insights of that, and more will come at some point soon, I hope. And besides all these results, there's also some fieldwork fun. I heard you had some fieldwork fun hopefully today as well, with measuring some services, and this is how it looks like in Zurich, taking soil samples. Very scientific. In a summer city, it was super warm. But there are also some nicer parks and cemeteries which look like these are these flower meadows I was picturing. If you look in the north, they look like this. And sometimes you end up in a very cool manor park, and then you just sample in the garden of this house, which is also quite fancy. So if you summarize this first part, what does urban biodiversity need? Well, it does need more natural, diverse, and connected green areas in cities. So providing this green and blue veins where the species can move within the city. The city could be kind of invisible from a nature perspective. It has habitats outside and inside the city, and all the species can just move. And what can we offer as ecologists? Well, we can offer urban restoration, meaning near natural green space management and taking care that the configuration, meaning where we place these patches of nature are in good shape and offer a diverse set of habitats. If we move now back from the biological or ecological part to the social part, telling that near natural management is important. If you I hope you believe me. And then it's just the question, it will never work if the people who will use the urban green space will accept it. So how do we increase the acceptance of near natural habitat management, and how big is this acceptance at all? And this was exactly I was talking of, which we came across with during a conference. So we made a questionnaire study to test the acceptance of near natural management of urban grasslands, and out of this came 2 publications, and I will show you the results. It was face-to-face interviews, and it was based on a pre-study in Münster in Germany, where I did my master's, and one colleague was doing his master and his PhD there in 2015. And then we replicated this study in 19 cities and 9 countries, ending up with about 2,000 samples. And here's the map of the cities were included. You see the blue colder Northern European cities and the Southern European cities. And there are actually many Spanish cities, because I asked a Spanish friend, said like, hey, do you know someone whom I could ask? And they just threw it to the Spanish list of ecologists, and there were many people answering. Yeah, it was very nice. And you can see the difference. So we have like the Northern European cities have high precipitation but low sunshine duration, and it's the opposite in the Southern European cities. And that's why vegetation and conditions are different, and we work with photographic stimuli, so showing people pictures. So we had 2 sets of pictures for the north and for the south. These pictures look like this. In the northern Europe, for lawns or parks, one big factor for near natural management is mowing frequency. So whether you mow it, that the lawn is never longer than 10 centimeters and has approximately 2 or 3 plant species, and the value is especially like, yeah, is low, or you reduce the mowing frequency and leave this at least some patches of not mown parts, where then there are more species, there's more insects, but it might also look a bit, it might look nice in spring, but in late summer it looks dry and maybe not so nice. So we asked people, we showed them these 2 photos and did a bit of photoshopping art by photoshopping this part in, and showed them, asked them, which picture do you prefer? And in a second set of questions, we also ask, why? Tell us, why do you prefer one or the other? And we did the same for the Southern European cities. And here the difference is that if you have managed lawns, they're often managed and irrigated, because otherwise they would dry out. So we had a picture like this, and then we had a picture, I think this is from Italy, from Rome, where these areas are not mown and not irrigated, so they might really look a bit of wild. And we ask again, which habitat do you prefer? Moreover, we collected respondents' attitude towards biodiversity conservation, and we asked how much do they agree to the statements of that function of urban grasslands is to provide space for humans, so it's very human-centered. And second, the function of urban grasslands is to provide habitats for plants and animals. And third, to which extent would you agree that 50% of urban grasslands should be converted to tall grass meadows, so meaning not being mown that often? And I know there are more urban ecosystems than urban grasslands, but we focused on this one because this is a type of urban ecosystem which is maybe the best studied and which is present throughout Europe. And then, of course, we collected information about the context of the respondents, their age, their sex, their place of residence, whether they visited green spaces regularly, what they do there, how familiar are they with the term biodiversity, would they agree with the statement that biodiversity conservation is the task of the society, so of everyone, not only the politicians, and how much they would agree to the statement that management of tall grass meadows increase health risks, to get an idea of maybe that the being afraid of some health risks like ticks would be a reason why people dislike near natural managed urban grasslands, for example. How do the results look like? Well, first we were a bit, as ecologists, maybe a bit disappointed. I studied grasslands and I like this part, but not many citizens like this. So the majority of people throughout all cities said shortcut lawns are my favorite. I like it. Interestingly, we then asked further to understand why is that? And one reason for this answer was because urban grasslands should be well kept. the majority of people, like about 75%, stated that they strongly agree with this statement that the focus on green space management should be on keeping sites tidy and with a well-kept appearance. So it's very important that it looks nice and orderly and safe and a bit maybe like a picture of an English lawn or park. On the other hand, people also agreed and found that green spaces should also provide a habitat function for nature. So about the same amount of people, like 70% said, I strongly agree with the statement that the focus of green space management should be on the creation of valuable habitats for animal and plants. While this is on one hand I try to explain later why it's very contradictory. How can they want to have well-kept English lawns but still want to provide habitat function? On the other hand, we can see this positively because this willingness to provide habitat function of urban green spaces also explains that there's the possibility or the agreement of people to more tall grass meadows, sustaining biodiversity in cities, and that they are okay with it. So because also the majority of people, after we explained them that this measure of having turning more lawns into tall grass meadows, they strongly agreed with this statement and they liked the idea. So there's hope. And to better understand what's the reason why people decided this way and how what do we need to do to better convince them or to do things in a way that they agree with the measures, we used the answers we collected to better understand who are these urban nature supporters, who are the people who would say like, yay, tall grass meadows. Suitable for Women's Day, it's a bit more women than men who supported it. But it doesn't really depend whether people live in cities, so whether it's city dwellers or suburbians, people living outside the cities. It was a bit more the Southern Europeans who voted more strongly, said often, yeah, I strongly agree for to provide urban habitat functions in urban green space. And it was people who frequently used the urban green space for picnicking, for sports, for going with the dog, for nature experiences. It was people who felt responsible for biodiversity conservation, and it was people who were familiar with the biodiversity term. So we also asked, before we told them that a tall grass meadow would be good for biodiversity, and explained them about biodiversity, we also asked whether they were familiar with the biodiversity term. And those who were familiar with the term were actually also those who were more supportive. And people were in general more supportive if they knew that why to convert lawns to tall grass meadows, although you might not be able to use them as a picnic at that time. And it was also people who were less alarmed by health risks, for example, by ticks. A second study, who looked at the qualitative answers, then digged a bit deeper and wanted to understand the reasons. So Jussi and Maria, they also just published it, categorized all these three answers. It was immense work to categorize all these three answers. People wrote everything, and they put it into categories and linked these values to whether people categorize these values whether they are associated with tall grass meadows, so less mowing, or with short-cut lawns, and supported people the values people associated with good values of tall grass meadows were that they were wild, natural, biodiverse. So it was the natural aspect, but also the beautiful aspect. To say, wow, wildflower meadows, they're so nice, I want to have them. On the other hand, values associated to negative associations with these meadows were like, yeah, it's wild, but it's too chaotic, it's dirty. People told like, yeah, I can't trust if it's like this high meadow, maybe people let the dogs run around and don't remove what the dogs leaves behind, and like, oh, it's dirty, and maybe people leave rubbish. I don't trust the city population. And then there were all these people like who were afraid of health risk, like ticks, like, oh no, I'm scared, better mow everything. And then it's people who said like, well, but it interferes with what I want to do. Where do I do picnic? Where do I do workout? Where do my kids play soccer? And the people who associated the positive values with tall grass meadows were again people who used the green spaces as frequently and for natural activities, for running, for hiking, for bird watching, and the more negative values were also slightly more pronounced in southern European cities. And I tried to understand it, and maybe it's really that the aspect, like in spring everything looks nice, and in summer the lawns look, maybe the tall grass meadows look not so nice if they're dry and brown. But this might be especially in areas like this. This is my first winter here, so I don't really know. This is pictures I captured during a walk through San Vicente, and I can imagine that these areas are now looking brown, but they will be probably greener in a couple of weeks. But in summer, I guess they're also again brown. So I can understand if people say, oh, if you leave it like this and you don't irrigate it, it's not really nice, and you would have this in a park. So that also might make people more critical about these measures. Okay, now we collected a lot of knowledge, and what can we then conclude from it, and what should we take care of? Well, first, the results of our biorange study and the results of the general agreement of people to near natural habitat management tells there should be near natural green spaces in cities. And maybe then there should be a balance between parks and biodiversity sites to give everyone the chance to use green spaces, but also the chance to coexist with nature. Nature has its space and we have our space. And then, well, this was something I presented this presentation the first time in Iceland, in the very first in the north, and I suggested, well, if Southern Europeans are a bit more positive about nature in cities, then maybe we should all do more holidays in the south, catch more sun, be happier, and be more positive. Maybe this is also just a culture of expression in this kind of questionnaires, because maybe in Sweden no one will ever tell, I very agree. They will always say, yeah, I agree, kind of, and they are very happy. But maybe here people say, yeah, I very agree, and it's just normal to say, I very agree. And in the light of the last results, maybe it is also the ecological context that the difference between a nice looking wild site in spring and an ugly looking wild site in summer is just bigger. We should provide contact of humans with nature, because people don't like new things and they look scary, and it's the same for kids. And it's important to expose them to nature. So more and more people in big cities never leave the city, they never see nature. And if we put this into cities, people are more exposed, and then for them it's not normal, or they even associate it. I mean, many studies of cultural landscapes say that people just think they have like these memories of playing there, and then they like this landscape and they accept it much more. And education plays a role. If we change something in the city which might impede the usage of an area for a while, or we should just inform people about it, to say like what is done, when it's done, for how long does it take, how is it done, why is it done. And I guess many people are very positive, and they're like, oh cool, my city is doing this, and maybe I can do this in my garden. And there's actually a really cool app in Estonia where a colleague of mine just did this thing where they took maps and overlaid the maps, and essentially you can click on a map and say like, here's my garden, and then you can decide whether you want to do something small for nature or medium or large, and then they give you suggestions based on the information they have of the map and the habitats in the surrounding, and they will suggest if you want to plant species, they will suggest a tree species or a nice flower. Yeah, and I guess something like this, people like to be involved if we inform them. And again, nature education, maybe for kids, maybe for adults, for everyone, to really not have this separation of city and nature, but just let it be part. And for everyone, it should be familiar and not scary, and maybe something standard. It should be normal to have some flowers around, and some trees, and some insects, and some bugs, and some birds. And also when you do these measures, to inform about the health risks, that they are there, but they are not immense, so that there's no panic. Yeah, action is needed, a lot of information is needed, but I think also a lot of enthusiasm is needed, and maybe you get it during your months of like excursions, and I will join one, and I hope by that time in 2 weeks my Spanish will be, of course, perfect, so I can understand everything. A good example I found in my hometown, where they made this flower meadow, and then they just put this information sign with the species and say what happened and who did it, and it's perfect, because people say like, oh cool, this is why it's like there's a fence, and this is what happens, and I'm pretty sure there are people passing this every week or every day, and then see how it changed. And yeah, this is how it should be. And maybe to conclude, I started with vegetation science, so I like plants, and you don't need to convince me that different plants are cool. And now I start with ecosystem functioning, and I say, ooh, more functions with more plants and more soil fungi. But besides this diversity of plants, it has also a function. If you see here, these are pictures from Estonia from 2018, actually in summer. It was 31 degrees hot, and with a warming camera, it shows that the pavement has about 45 degrees. And everywhere there's vegetation, it's far lower. In the shade of trees, it's like 27 degrees. But it also shows that here's a stripe of unmown lawn, and here is a mown lawn. And while the mown grass is about 37 degrees, the unmown grass is 30 degrees. So high vegetation, trees, unmown lawns, shrubs, they just reduce the temperature in cities. And probably you know this far better than I do, because I guess the summers are very hot. Yeah, but this is also something to keep in mind, and it really will make the climate in the city better. It will make sleep everyone better. You don't need so much air conditioning. You can be better outside. No one gets like heat strokes. And yeah, it's really, it's a very important service we should not miss. And the last and very quick point about conservation and restoration targets. Well, in an ideal world, for me, I think cities should be invisible for natural species, as I said. It should be like, there should be a meta community, a structure of green spots where species can commute from outside the city, through the city, to beyond the city. And we should just provide this network. But on the other hand, we could also say, oh, if the outside cities, it's so horrible, there's so much agriculture, maybe cities could be a refuge for natural species. It could be like the safe spot, because there, I don't know, we plant them in gardens and in parks. And it could also be not only focusing on native species, could be also say, oh, our city should be a botanical garden. Like there are exotic species and native species, and it's just good to have as much as possible. And then we have also many animals, and these are all possibilities, and they all, if we, it's a question what we want to reach, and then we need to start think about, if we want to reach one of those, how big habitats do we need? Maybe for this meta structure idea, we don't need that many large habitats, but they need to be very connected, and we need to have like biodiversity stepstones. And if we want to talk about safe refuge of native species, we might not want many ornamental species, but for the botanical garden idea, we might be okay with ornamental species. And this is all just hypothetical ideas, but they point to the thing I mentioned at the beginning. We need a target. Where do we want to go? And the colleague Valentin and Klaus and Katrin Klein, they thought about it. And in restoration ecology, there's the big tradition that you have a restoration goal. You have a reference ecosystem. And in natural ecosystems, this is usually the historic state. For example, you have in Australia, you have like a how do they call them? An eucalyptus woodland, and then you have a mine there, and after this mine has been done, you want to go back to this woodland. And sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't work. But urban ecosystems, one problem is they're so degraded, so different from the historic system, that if you want to restore them, is your aim the historic system? But what is the historic system? What is the historic system of the park-like structures in the university campus? Is it a rainforest? Is it a dryland? Is it an oak forest? And is this realistic? And what very nicely they, like Katrin and Valentin, propose is that we can't make cities supernatural, but we can make them more natural, and we can make them more valuable for nature. So maybe the restoration is then to find new references, to find an alternative, which could not be a natural ecosystem, but it could be an old remnant of a forest, and you think, oh, this old remnant is part of a park, and this park is very valuable, so we try to make the park next to it similar. Or there's nothing like this, and you think like, oh, I have this green roof, the conditions of this green roof are similar to this kind of ecosystem, so maybe we make it a dry grassland. So to also be flexible in this target, but to think of what target is useful and realistic. And yeah, with this, I say thank you that you have listened to me. I hope you found it interesting. I thank everyone, Valentin, like from the core team, and many collaborators to see all like the different university icons, and the funding, of course. And well, if you have questions, just let me know.
Oh, thanks, Lena. So you guys have any question? You can write it in the chat if you are sort of afraid of speaking in English.
Or you can say it in Spanish, and then Santi needs to translate.
That's also another possibility. Okay, so while the students are taking some value, I have a few questions. Yeah, Laura, you go.
Sí, en castellano, ¿vale?
No problema.
Si quieres crear un corredor verde dentro de una ciudad, por ejemplo, para interconectar diferentes parques naturales que puede haber dentro de la ciudad? ¿Cuál sería una de las mejores opciones que puedes hacer para conectarlos? O sea, la mejor opción que podrías usar para conectarlos.
Okay. Lena, I translate, don't worry. So she's asking about how to create natural corridors within the cities to connect different natural areas or sort of protected areas outside the city so the cities can work as a corridor within them.
It's interesting because on one hand, in the natural area, there are already these ideas that you have one forest, you have a field, you have another forest, and you make like a hedgerow to connect them. And then there are studies showing that species don't use this. They don't say like, there's the corridor, I like go. So I guess it depends. I don't have a perfect answer, but I could think that if you have like stepstones, you have maybe 2 forests and then you have forest-like parks in the city, because plants can move and they move with birds, and so that maybe you have enough green habitats throughout the city so that they can move. Yeah, and maybe if it's habitats which are managed, for example, by sheep, like they are grazed, it would be nice to let the sheep graze on one area and then let them move to another area so that they mix the thing they have on their fur. Yeah. I think I understood actually the question.
Okay, that's good to hear. So you brought out the meta-community concept several times, and you were talking about 50% of unmown grass, like a potential target to keep biodiversity. And you were also talking about it might be more interesting to have small patches, many small patches within the cities rather than big chunks of natural or subnatural or semi-natural spaces in the city. What brought you to these recommendations? Why 50% and why many small versus big? Many small versus several big ones, which is the lost debate it was in natural parks like 50 years ago. Still unresolved.
Exactly. I think to be honest, the 50-50 idea was simply to have like an idea for the questionnaire and to say this is realistic. You could retain a park and all the functions in it, like the picnics and the paths, and also have tall grasslands. So you don't need to mix that. And I guess if you have the chance to have like really big parks, like you would have several parks at the size of in Madrid, which is it, the Retiro? If you have 3 retiros, like perfect, do it. But I guess in reality, this is just not, you can't, because all the cities are already there and you can't just make a whole block, like say people, you need to move, we need to make a park out of it. So I guess it's better to think that you need to include the gardens and maybe the balconies and the rooftops to use what is there.
Might also be a little bit more sort of democratic or governance. Every neighborhood has the little green space, even though it's small, but still you have your own.
Yeah.
Does anyone has further questions?
I don't have a question, but well, I'm from England, and I know that in England the attitude's totally different. Everyone has their gardens, and now more and more I've noticed people are starting to plant little mini wildflower meadows in their gardens rather than just have completely mowed lawns all the time. But I think part of the problem is that we have a lot more. For example, there's a TV show. Sorry if I'm speaking too fast for everyone.
Spring Watch is gonna be the TV.
Watch.
Yes,
my
favorite.
It's amazing, and it's a TV show that's on. They actually have Spring Watch, Autumn Watch, and Winter Watch, and what's the other season? I forgot. And it's a TV show that's on for like a week every season, and it talks about wildlife you can find in your garden and your local area. So I think people have a much better attitude there compared to here, because people are more aware of things they can do. But then they also have an advantage because they have gardens, and here it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. And this is exactly what for example, this app in Estonia, I think this is exactly the thing to communicate to people, because in Estonia, the culture, on one hand, everyone is very related to nature, but then they don't see the point of having nature in their garden because nature is outside. And to motivate them to say, hey, you can do something yourself. You don't need to put this exotic, not flowering shrub to your garden, but you can take, I don't know, how is it called? I think in English it's lilac. You can put something in the garden which is from your country and which is good for wild bees, or put a bee hotel, or and to motivate this kind of things. Or to have guerrilla gardens. I don't know how well it here works, because it will probably in Denmark or in Switzerland it works because you don't have to water it. I mean, no one waters these things, but here you would probably need someone to take care.
It's also a question of culture. Like it's true that in England you have more access or more direct contact with nature, but here we do have, like, for example, swallows, Hirundo rustica or golondrina in Spanish. These birds are all over the place. They are very common, but people actually don't like the nests because of the things that they leave behind, as Lena was using. So the crap of the nest is making your terrace dirty, so people avoid this kind of natural contact because it's dirty and it's not tidy. So I think this is this cultural barrier that we need to sort of fight for, or try to educate through more information, perhaps working with kids, something like that.
Yeah, and one thing, like the one researcher in our group, she did this work with this a bit longer, and they called it orderly frames. So that whatever you do in public parks, but also in your garden, to provide these hybrid options, to say, look, we can do something, this is good for nature, but you can still live with it. For example, maybe like have only little stripes of flower meadows or wilder areas, and then have also a part where you can have your barbecue and there's no birds disturbing you or something.
Another thing I wanted to ask, Lena, I know you don't have a lot of experience yet in semi-arid cities, but I guess through the lockdown during the weekends, you had the time to walk around San Vicente and see that rather than green spaces, we have the natural spaces tend to be brown. And you are hoping for them to be green in 2 weeks, but it's not going to happen. So they tend to be brown the whole year long, and that's just how our nature looks like in semi-arid environments. And another potential for cities to become biodiversity refugees here in under semi-arid conditions is because we can water actually. We can keep it unmanaged, but add some water at least during summer or early spring to keep them sort of for a longer period alive or photosynthetically active. So are you aware of any research on that, or not cutting the grass but still watering it in semi-arid environments, or how?
No, I know that we had this discussion with a colleague from Rome who brought this topic up. That maybe irrigation is definitely, I think he mentioned that irrigation is a topic, but then maybe it's just too much, like, because water is anyway a spare good, and then if you say, well, and now I put it on the urban green spaces, it's just too much. I mean, maybe you could put less on on English lawns and save the water for some nicer ones, maybe.
Yeah, that was a little bit. Yeah. That was a little bit my point, because in here perhaps people don't value highly or intensively managed lawns because they spend so much water. So we have still this golf course thing here, and I think many people won't value that much in here that in Northern Europe. Mm-hmm. It's also because we don't use it that much. The grasslands, we don't spend our time in nature or in outside, like sitting on the grass, because people don't clean after the dogs and things like that. Rather, with the exception of the campus, I don't think people stays in parks that much.
But then this would be a perfect option to start, to say, look, you have this lawn, you don't use it, and it's not good for anyone, and it uses water, so maybe spare water, and then you can sell it even as reducing costs.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. And if the semi-arid ecosystems are more about shrubs and trees, or then maybe this could be a replacement. I mean, yeah. And what I saw in the campus, there's so many birds. There are birds we don't. There's the one which has a white and black striped tail. I don't know how it's so rare in Germany, and here I'm like, it's here. It's sitting in the campus. Yeah.
Yeah, we have many. And another thing, one of the things I want to do with the students here is to provide them with as many tools I can, so they can sort of perform in their professional life after the master. So I was wondering if you could tell us the name of the app that you were mentioning on Estonia. I thought that was a really interesting input that we could sort of apply here or convert it to here.
Estonian.
Oh shit! Okay.
It's called Igaühe Looduskaitse.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which means natural, everyone's nature conservation. But what I can ask is, I don't know. I can ask Avelina whether she plans to translate it. I mean, I can translate if they want. I can go through it and explain the most ideas behind it because I understand it. But yeah, it would be cool. We could make a project and just translate it, make it Spanish.
Indeed. But where do the recommendations come from? So is all this research in Estonian cities so you are able to recommend to everyone in every place what to do, or is it some kind of expert knowledge?
It's both. I think it's a lot of map. It's just a lot of guesswork. So you have a land cover map outside the city. So you have habitats which are outside the city, and then you probably have categorized species to these habitats, and then it's based on distances. So maybe and I guess some small things are always the same. Like it's probably it depends a bit how big is your garden or the area, and what is a native species. It's not very. It's rather easy. It's not too much. I think they might use a bit the species pool concept because they have all these species pool studies going on, and so they know, and they have a map of Estonia of plant species for each 10 by 10 square meters, kilometers of 10 by 10 kilometers. So they might use that. But it's rather coarse. I mean, it's nothing fancy, nothing like super special. So one could replace it. I mean, it would, for example, if my house is close to the swampland, I would maybe have, then they think, oh, your soil is this and that. So maybe you can rather plant bamboo, or I have no clue which plant is it good for this area. And someone else who is closer to the mountains and they have very, very gypsum soils, they might just rather plant an oak tree, which can grow on this area.
Okay, so it's based on the dark diversity concept, sort of.
A bit, not completely, but I think they might use some information. Yeah.
Nice.
But I can ask, I can look into it. I like this. It's just, you can learn Estonian and then you can read it. No.
Yeah, it seems a rather difficult challenge. So guys and girls, do you have any more questions? Could you ask in Spanish if you want? I'm happy to translate. Or Jessica, you could translate for me. Your English is way, way better.
I'm happy to translate anything.
All right. So if not further questions, I will just say thanks to Lena Neuekamp for contributing this very nice talk, who will serve as an introduction to the topic we will be speaking now. So, well, normally you get clapping hands here, so I will try if it works.
Thanks.
It's a little bit cold, but it's the way it is these days. So thanks a lot, Lena. And, well, I hope we'll see each other soon during the field trip to Pinoso.
Yeah, it will be nice. Super good. Yeah, thanks. Have a good course till then. And whenever you have a question, just drop me a message. You can also write Spanish, then I learn it. That's good.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Gracias.
De nada.
Vale, pues voy a parar de grabar. ¿Queréis descansar?